We all know endgames are very tricky monsters to handle, and especially so in a rapid play game. But looking at this position on the board where Sergei Karjakin playing white against Maxim Novik in the Moscow Blitz of 2002, how many of us would actually believe that white could win this endgame? Black, in a same coloured bishop ending, has an outside passed pawn. White, on the other hand, has no passed pawns whatsoever. So what are the chances of white actually managing to win this game? Well, as I've just said, this was a rapid play game, so I don't want to be too hard on Mr. Novik. What I will say is, he probably pushed too hard in this game. And it's one of the hallmarks, again, of a strong player, is that you can try and tempt your opponent using tricks, to try and overpress. Here we see exactly that. Karjakin pushed his pawns on the queen side, and he tempted his opponent to try some tricks, but in fact, it backfired on him. Let's see exactly how Karjakin managed to achieve this. Now, King e4, a very sensible move, but I still think that, although this position is pretty much equal, we'd rather be black because of this h-pawn. But black has to be very careful in the way he handles this, because if he pushes it too far, he might actually end up losing this pawn. So, h5. Well, I think that's far enough at the moment, and white played bishop f4. How can white win this endgame? I think even if black managed to lose this h-pawn, like this, the black king could still make its way over to the queen side and try and hold a draw. So I'm assuming Mr. Novik was quite happy with this position at the moment. King f6, c4, and he now pushed his h-pawn one step closer to that queening square on h1. Now, what can we say? Well, since I don't know either player that well, I'm going to have to say I would still prefer to be black in this position. But b4 is a sensible idea. In case you don't know about things that you read in opening books or endgame books, they talk about pawn majorities. Here white has a majority, and he's going to try and push them to try and exchange off those two black pawns in order to make his own passed pawn. Still though, it's not clear how white is going to be able to achieve that. He's a very long way from that, whereas black already has this passed pawn on h4. So he pushed it even further, h3. And c5. Well, this was connected with a lovely idea here, a good try from Karjakin, because after bishop d8, white now played b5. Again, we're seeing another tactical idea from Sergei. He, even with a bishop and 3 pawns each, he's noticed that if black were to capture, he actually ends up winning the bishop because of the nature of where it stands on d8. For example, king e6 and c7. Black would be obliged to take, and we would reach this position. Can white still win? Well, the answer really should be no, because let's imagine that all of these black pawns are off the board. It would still be a draw if black could run his king to the a8 square. The reason being is that the pawn on a2 would like to get to a8, but that's a white square. The queening square on a8 is a white square, and the bishop that white has is on a dark square. So unless white can prevent the king running back there, that should still be a draw. In fact, I've even had that position in a game myself. So I know how annoying that can be to allow the black king all the way back there. So it should still be a draw, but I'm guessing that Maxim Novik was still probably a little bit shocked by that move. However, he still has this excellent pawn on h3 as a deflecting tool. So he continued, bishop a5. Of course, that allowed white to win the pawn on c6, but then he went king e7. Now, I'm guessing that black, despite the time trouble, being a rapid play game, he had an idea here which he thought was winning. Unfortunately for him, he overlooked a big tactic, which Karjakin, of course, did not miss. Black's idea is to try and play bishop c7. Why do you think that black would want to do that? Well, if we can sort of get rid of that bishop on f4, black's h-pawn will be free to roam. The only piece of white's would be able to stop that is the king, so the white king would have to try and run back. But in the meantime, the white king is being deflected towards the king side, and that means that black's king can go over here and try and win all of white's pawns. Now, even then, it's going to be very difficult for black to win that. But that was his idea. So after king f3, king d8, black has tried to implement this plan of playing bishop c7. So after king g3, presumably black played bishop c7 under the intention that he was nearly winning here. Now, what can white do about that? Can you see the move that black missed in this position? And the answer is bishop d6. That's a very tricky move to see if you haven't got much time on your clock. And now the position is completely changed. If I just show, in fact, if white had to swap on the c7, we're going to reach this position where both players have a pawns. It's a question of whether white can get back to c1 to try and prevent that. And in fact he can. If we see like this, it's a draw. The general rule in this position is if your opponent has an a pawn like this, you need your king to be back on the at least the bishop starting square on c1, or any of these of course will be good enough, but the starting square of the bishop on c1 is the general rule. So this would still be a draw. However, after bishop d6, it is in fact white who is winning, and it's a complete turnaround from the starting position. So fantastic play there, but there's still a lot to overcome even in this position. Let's have a look. Bishop a5. Now here, if white can get the king in around here, it's probably going to be easily winning. But Novik found a very nice idea, which was bishop takes c5. A very nice idea, connected to that idea of the a pawn on a8. Because after king c7, we have that exchange. But as I just said, the pawn on a2 is going to have a light square as its queening square, and he only has a dark squared bishop. So the black king is going to be able to run back very quickly to a8, and it's going to be a draw. So, having obtained this slight advantage, Karjakin decided, well, I've got to play for a win now. So he kept the bishops on. It's still not easy to win, but let's see how he manages to achieve this. He brings the king in. Now, he needs to try and swap off the bishop, so he attempts to do that. And in fact, black probably blundered. He should have played bishop a5 to prevent a king infiltration on b6. But instead he played the obvious move, and I think this is connected again to what I mentioned about Karjakin's tactical skill in luring his opponents into playing obvious moves that are not actually that good. And here's another example, because bishop f2 check is an obvious move, but after bishop d4, the problem for black is that a bishop swap will be bad for him. Like this, the king is going to be able to come in and win the a pawn. Or, if he keeps the bishops on, as he does in the game, he actually loses the a pawn anyway. And this again takes some skill, but here we see Karjakin understanding his endgames. a4, an excellent move. The point is, he fixes the pawn on a black square. And now, the bishop on d4 is going to be able to somehow win it like this in just a few moves. Just watch how he does that. King b5, freeing up the square for the bishop, and now bishop takes a5. So, a complete turnaround again. 2 pawns and the bishop should be winning. Of course, black plays on, but we see Karjakin using his king to great effect and pushing the pawns. White does have to be a little bit careful, and you're going to see a stalemate trick here. Like this, bishop c7. Of course, even with a matter of seconds on your clock, you should be very careful about rushing any move. Of course, Karjakin is not going to fall for king takes bishop, being a stalemate. But instead, bishop e7 was played. And here, black resigned, because wherever the bishop moves, let's say bishop f4, white simply cuts it off, and the c-pawn is free to march. So, again, a very strong player playing as black, and he was sort of fooled once or twice there by Karjakin due to the tactical skill. And I think at the current moment in time, in May 2013, Karjakin is the highest rated blitz player in the world. And you can see why, can't you? For reasons just like this. He's very good at fooling his opponents and making them play what appear to be good moves, but actually they are tactically flawed. So, excellent play from Karjakin in this endgame, showing us how to win the same coloured bishop ending.